Good morning. Happy Monday, LinkedIn. Welcome to Let's Build Your HubSpot Map with Bryan Ossa. How you doing today, man?
What's up, everyone? Doing fantastic. And, like on Mondays, what better way to spend your time than listening to me drone on about how to improve your business at first thing in the morning? It's the best thing to do, right? And if not, I'm sorry.
A great way to start the week because I really love, we say mapping. Um, I just had a urge to go deep in like how maps get built, like in the real world. We won't go there,
Oh,
but
man, you're not wrong.
ultimately, you got to know where you want to go,
Oh, yeah.
uh, but more importantly, where you are right now. And most people, unfortunately, when they think about, or when we think about customer platform, HubSpot, and all these hubs, there's a ton of people just sitting there with functionality that's available to them for no extra charge. And that's what I mean when they don't know where they are. They don't know
Mhm.
what they have access to. So we're going to dive into, hopefully some shiny objects that will might get your attention today. Some great use cases that you could use HubSpot for, and then kind of walk it back from there, what it takes to do that. So I'm excited for today's conversation.
Oh, yeah. I think it's going to be a good one, too, because uh, to your point, a lot of this is it's not like it's a new shine that you need to pay more for. It's something that already exists. And it can be used instead of certain other tools if you're bootstrapping. And I know, kind of speaking a little cryptically, so let's get a little bit more concrete on all that. And what I'm referring to is just using HubSpot for more of like an operations perspective. And so when I'm talking operations, thinking things like how you can manage your content, how you can do your project management, heck, even how you can to some degree manage your human like your HR and your job, and as well as maybe even performance reviews and things like that. Those are all things that are, while it's probably not the best scenario to do it in HubSpot once you're a little bit more of an advanced company, while you are getting started, there are things that you can definitely bootstrap and make work for you. So with
Yeah.
that, like Chris, I want to throw you the question, just like when you were getting started out here with conveying your message, like had any of this even really occurred to you, or were you just kind of like, you know what, I have the tools I use, let's just go.
Well, short answer is yes, just because
I
I've
don't think you
always
used them.
I've always implemented all the hubs,
Yeah.
like ever since 2017 when I first met. They were coming out with, Sales Hub and Service Hub.
Hmm.
So I was always, and I was coming from a place where like all I had was QuickBooks, and I knew all these things were in the business that we had no management of. I had recently been introduced to Teams. So, like, I understood the power of internal communication and internal collaboration, um, which I think that's where, last week I came up with the narrative of like, what if we just what if CRM stood for communication and
Hmm.
relationship management? Like that simple
Really good.
change, like, is it okay to do these other things in this platform now? Because really the power of HubSpot, and I try to simplify it once you understand the building blocks, like it's great at communication management. I often lean on it to kind of facilitate collaboration because it's easier to collaborate, especially in the days of free user seats,
Hmm.
which we might not be in anymore. But um, it's it just makes things easier. And if you can do, because some of these other tools that we might be replacing if we're trying to bootstrap, they're not even good at
Hmm.
this part, right? Like application tracking systems, for example, like they're good at the ATS part,
Hmm.
but when you need to collaborate and communicate internally and externally with the people who are, they're not. good at that part. Like it's very rote, it's very inhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can bring some of that stuff into HubSpot, we're not suggesting that it takes over the world in terms of functionality. There's lots of things you should not be doing in there. But when it comes to communication, internally and externally, um, it's it's the best tool out there, like
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. So why would you like restrict yourself and say, oh, this is the sales CRM, so we can only have sales contacts in there? Like for me, it's any human relationship that you want to manage or you want to understand how it's going, whether that's internal, external, customers, partners, job candidates. Like there is a path towards making, not even making, like using HubSpot for that purpose. And that's where we get into things like association labels and managing contacts. But really, it's just the decision to do that. And as you guys were introducing me to Notion,
Mm-hmm.
last week, um, kind of the catch 22 of my mind being able to kind of just connect all the dots all the time. When I see objects, I see properties,
Mm-hmm.
I see pages, I see stage and gate, pipelines.
Mm-hmm.
We can do most of the things that most SaaS softwares do with those building blocks. And when we think about those things in conjunction, like it's just about what your goals are with these tools. And that's where like we need to start. And that's hopefully these use cases can give you some ideas on what's even possible. You can decide, hey, I want that, but then take a step back and say, these are the building blocks I need, map them out, and then it can do a great job for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's hugely important. And you took on the Notion point is actually a really good aspect of where I was headed, because I know a lot of times, like when you're getting started with a business, or honestly, even when you're established and wanting to do a pivot, you don't necessarily just want to start adopting willy nilly, because as you're just bringing in more and more, it's that much more software you need to manage, that many more different ways of doing things you need to keep up with. And so keeping things simple is a good place to be. And the thing that I tend to recommend a lot of the times is start with one tool and really get it to the point where you're not even at 100%, but you feel like you're overflowing and you're now like 105 or 110%. And you're like, okay, this is like way too overwhelming. Then you can start looking at splitting things up. Because if you're still not quite reaching the threshold, maybe it doesn't make sense. And so, like, the Notion example is a perfect opportunity, because there's a lot of folks who want to dive immediately into just getting a project management tool, which is what we're going to lean into today. And so, immediately, it's just like, all right, I need to adopt an Asana, or I need to adopt a Monday, or ClickUp, or anything along those lines. The thing is, if you're doing if it's just yourself, or maybe yourself and a couple other people, chances are that while that might be helpful to kind of keep track of the projects there, you're then actually just you're paying for a new tool and you're adding extra work to what you need to do, because keeping track of all these projects, yes, it's important, but you could keep track of projects in other tools that you're probably spending more time in, so it doesn't feel like, oh crumb, I'm now spending extra time, extra energy, extra work logging into this other tool just to write down the thing that I've already done, because that's frustrating for everyone.
Yeah.
So,
And this context switching, like, gets overwhelmed. Like, you build this system out for yourself. And then as soon as you ask somebody else to use it, and it's not their, like, training and onboarding doesn't happen when it needs to. Like, they come in, dabble, like, mess with your stuff just enough, right?
mm-hmm,
That hurts, the overall adoption if you're trying to like grow that.
mm-hmm,
Um, but also like how some of these tools like Monday.com eventually came out with CRM. Like, why did they do that? Because, well, first of all, they had a combination. They have the system with the building blocks that I mentioned, but
mm-hmm,
also we need to manage projects in relationship to customers.
You don't, yeah, projects don't stand alone. If you're doing a
Right?
project without talking about a person, what's the point?
Right. So that's where like you can start in a tool that is focused on project management. And I talk about this a lot, like the DNA. Like if you think about where the tool started and what it was built to do, whether it's CRM, ERP, project management, if your ultimate goal is customer management or relationship management, communication management, and you knew these three options were available, why would you try to use an ERP first
Mm-hmm.
or a project management tool first if your goal is communication management? Like all things equal, it wouldn't make logical sense for you to do that. Now, if your first goal is accounting or project management and it's for like the product development engineering team, like the bowels of the organization that's never going to see, the light of a customer, like, yeah, like there's some really sophisticated and those are the kinds of things like you start using the project management tools, the
Mm-hmm.
built to suit tools. But hopefully, and again, we come back to the mapping. If you map all this out in the context of your business, you're choosing tools that can integrate with each other and start to pass information back and forth. Because I'll say, like, even in the deepest bowels of your project management, I guarantee I can draw a path that
Mm-hmm.
connects to the customer at some point. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Exactly. And ultimately, it all distills to the same kind of functionality anyway. And so, if you're going to be building out something that you want to keep consistent and cohesive, doing it in a tool earlier on, a tool like HubSpot is a really good place to be because when you're in this tool, you have a lot more control over the experience, how the properties work, what people are able to see when they're setting things up, and even on the dashboard and the viewing pane. So, like we've all seen, like all three of these main panes that you see within HubSpot, they're all pretty unique. Not unique. They're all fairly static and consistent. No matter what portal you're in, you're always going to see these three fields. Whether or not you're looking at tickets, contacts, companies. For right now, we're looking at cartographer, or we look at conveying your message, or at any one of our other clients or companies. It's all going to be the same experience. It's
Oh,
just
I'm
how
so
you
glad.
tweak. It's
I'm
just
so
how
glad
you
you hit on that.
yeah. It's just how you
Like,
tweak the individual things.
because people often compare HubSpot to systems like Salesforce or
Mm-hmm.
ERP systems. And when we think about why these systems don't get adopted, like even WordPress, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there is something to be said for blank slate and working off of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when you do that? Literally every business sets it up differently.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is it harder to onboard new people, like even if they've used the system before, it's harder to get help with the system, like from contractors and developers. Or when you do get help, they all come in and do it a different way because they can,
Mm-hmm.
versus the guardrails that HubSpot has built
Right.
throughout its history. And even as we go customizable, like super configurable, the guardrails are still there.
Mm-hmm.
I always push back against, well, I want it to look like this and like this, and I need customizability here, even with the navigation,
Mm-hmm.
right? I believe they're designing for a future where you can design that yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but understand that like when you create this super customized system, it's harder to train new people. It's harder
Exactly.
to get help with that system when you've got to train everybody, how your system works because it
Right.
doesn't look anything like the other HubSpot platform you were just a part of.
Exactly right. And so like this is like the perfect example of that where, from a project management standpoint. So like we were talking about like an Asana or a Notion or a Jira. And like a lot of those project management tools, especially Notion, are very much blank slate. You get in there and how you want it structured and organized is really open to interpretation. And for a lot of people, especially when you're getting started, that's terrifying because the last thing you want to do is have to figure out one more thing. Versus if you just pop in here, get yourself set up on, a ticket pipeline, which, I haven't set up under tickets, but honestly, you can set this up under a deal pipeline if you want. It honestly, the important part is the verticals you have here and how you're building and associating the properties. As long as you're doing that like a right way for you, that's all you really need.
Yes.
And
And I'll ask this and see if you agree. Like, I think
go
one
for
of the keys are like, we're not trying to create silos,
it. Mm-hmm.
but we need to create clear spaces of ownership for the people that you're asking to come into the system and use the system, own their process, own the data in that process. Because what will often happen, and this is where there's so much nuance to the advice of like best practices for deal pipeline management, best
Mm-hmm.
practices for help desk setup.
Mm-hmm.
And something you'll often hear, especially as it relates to deal pipelines, is less is better, right? And that's where people get in trouble because they're like, oh, I shouldn't make a bunch of different pipelines. So I'm going to make a deal pipeline
Mm-hmm.
that goes from start to finish. It has lead management in it, it has
Mm-hmm.
purchasing in it, it has sales in it, and you're not going to get any good reporting. You're going to have people trying to work out of the same spaces, tripping all over themselves. This is the point where they stop using the system. They're exporting things constantly because that's the only way they can be clear. And appreciating having some empathy, like it's their like they can't blame HubSpot if they don't get their job done. So they're going to find ways to get their job done. And if HubSpot's not helping them do that, they will find other ways. So finding a way to, again, we come back to mapping. Um, it looks like, we've lost Brian. I think he'll be back soon. I hope. But when we talk about mapping and mapping against the business goals, right? It is understanding what your goals are with the system. Um, if you know how these softwares work, I've had lots of customers ask, uh, you know, can I do project management in HubSpot? Right? Because they see the similarities between the pipelines and you see all the properties and see a lot of the same things. Right. And that's where, like, how deep do you want to go? Figuring out the balance between, okay, everybody's already in HubSpot using the system. Does uh, you know, is it worth it to start using this different project management platform to take advantage of all the advanced project management capabilities? Or do we, place a higher value on just starting up in the system, right? With the people who are already in it and, making it like this is where, again, like the setup of HubSpot being the same everywhere is in line with those tools. So when you see a pipeline in HubSpot, whether it's on deals, tickets, or custom objects,
Mm-hmm.
like 80% of how it's going to operate. If you spin up the project management, now it's a different kind of pipeline management that we have to learn. And even down to the point of, this Kanban board is going to look very similar to this Kanban board in the different systems, but how the drag and drop works and what you're going to be able to do with that stuff, like, changes. Uh, so that's why we come back to, what do you want to do? What do you need to do inside of the system? And who do you need to do it? I think that is a part where it's easy for admins and managers to say, okay, I want to do this thing, so I'm going to use this system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm going to go get the tool to solve the problem. without thinking about the person that will now have to log into 3 systems
Mm-hmm.
instead of one to do their job, and bringing them into the process, understanding, okay, if I'm in this, that happens all the time with ERPs. It's like
Oh yeah,
we
it
don't
happens everywhere.
understand that
Like,
multiple systems are not great for productivity.
oh yeah, yeah, it happens everywhere. And I appreciate before doing that, thanks for kind of continuing things on while the network did its full recycle, the luxuries of remote work. But hey, at least it booted quickly.
Welcome back, man. You weren't gone very long.
Yeah. But you hit the nail on the head when, like, I look at that as like the 9-1 mentality of just like, you have this tool that accomplishes 90% of what you want to do, but that one last 10%, it doesn't quite do. And so you adopt another tool that accomplishes that last 10%. Unfortunately, it only does 90% of it and removes 10%. And next thing you know, you have 4 tools that ultimately do what you need it to do. But if you just narrowed it down, you can simplify your life and probably your budget and savings too.
Yeah.
And so,
And especially as we expand into new stakeholders in the organization, new teams. Like one of my as a very not project manager, I wanted, like, so I was in Microsoft 365, organizations. So, and in all honesty, like between 365, HubSpot, and the ERP,
mm-hmm.
we should be able to do any damn thing we want.
That'd be a nice
Like,
place to be.
right. So, one of the places I started, because there was no project management tool, it's like I really wanted Planner to work
Mm-hmm.
because it required no additional licensing fees. Everybody already had their Microsoft, set up. It would have been easy to add into Teams. And that's all we're talking about here. Like, try to find it's a balance. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want you to just do everything in HubSpot because you have HubSpot. Like, that's not what we're suggesting here.
No.
But make sure though that 10% is like a deal breaker if you don't have it, uh, and that's going to require you to have this other platform.
Exactly.
Especially keeping in mind how fast HubSpot moves. Right, they're
Yeah.
developing stuff, and other platforms are too. But just kind of understanding, like, if like the non-negotiable is customer management and customer communication management, then we at least ask the question first: could we, should we, would we do this in HubSpot? It's not
Mm-hmm.
always going to be yes, but I guarantee if the other system, or if this use case has anything to do with customer data,
Mm-hmm.
at the very least, that system will need to integrate, with HubSpot at some point. So, yeah. So let's get into some of these use case
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah. We'll dive into a couple of examples, and there's a couple that I want to show off the top of the head. And the first one we've already looked at a little bit here, and that's just the project management process. I mean, like we were saying, whether or not it's a ticket or a sales pipeline, it doesn't need to be anything complicated because you can just drag and drop it as long as you have the verticals put into play. That's all you need. The important thing to keep in mind when you're setting this up is one, your verticals, obviously. And number two, when you have that create a new ticket or create a new project file, you want to make sure that this form is editable, edited to the way you want it to be. And you can just do that very easily. And in so doing, that makes sure you're getting all the information that you need to have associated with that particular item right here as soon as you're creating the project.
Yeah. And work with your users here.
Yeah.
Like, don't get nuts about the required fields unless
Yeah.
they are absolutely required, because that is another thing that will kill adoption in its tracks.
Yes. Please,
Like,
please don't. Honestly, like right here, I only have the 3 different ones, these 3 first ones set up. But honestly, the pipeline, if you're only using one, this doesn't even need to be required because you only have one choice. But like, if you really need to have anything else established, I would say your priority is probably a good one to associate with a requirement. And then I would also argue the description is probably important too, because especially if you're handing this off to someone who's not necessarily working directly with it, context is king, and if you don't have that context, you're not going to be able to move forward with it.
Yeah.
So just a
And
couple things there, and then again to your point earlier, and the thing we've been harping over for weeks at this point, please use the associations. The more and better we use the associations, the more effective that this is going to be, because it boils down to like managing your contacts. And if you can tie this to, you know, a specific contact within a specific company. So, if I'm doing this for you, Chris, where it's like, I'm typing things in. I have like I have Chris coming in over here at conveying your message. It's now I know this ticket's associated. You're the one who reached out asking for it, and this is the company I'm working for it with.
yeah,
That's
and
gonna
this
make
is
your life so much easier. And then instead of having to have a whole bunch of different projects for each one of your different clients, you can now just filter and it
yeah,
all lives in one place, and you don't need to have 20 different projects. You can have one project that you just filter and create different views depending on your different clients, and it'll
yeah.
save so much sanity.
And a couple, like, I think there's one litmus test here, maybe a trick to get adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the litmus test is if you get to the end of that form and you never, like your use case, you'll never need to associate it with a contact or a company ever, then that's something that should probably be outside of HubSpot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but don't limit yourself to sales contacts when you think about that. I think one of the biggest gaps I see is when we talk about supply chain management and purchasing processes. Like if I'm a salesperson and I've set expectations for a lead time and that lead time changes and that communication is happening only in some, purchasing person's email inbox, I want that information in HubSpot so that I can easily be notified and then update the customer, right? There's a bunch of supply chain stuff that lives outside of systems that if we just expand the view a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff should definitely be in HubSpot. And now we get better at managing our supplier relationships too, because they're humans. And anyways, the trick,
Sure.
a trick to some adoption here is because sometimes you just show this to stuff and people and they're like used to working out of a spreadsheet
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, oh, this is so fancy. I don't
Right.
know. Right.
Change
You
your
can,
toggle view, and it looks exactly like a spreadsheet. It's just
right. And like
well.
just click into these fields to change like,
Mm-hmm.
pipeline. Like if you go back real quick
Oh
on
yeah,
that page, right?
you go in here.
Like we can go in there and even if this is free text, multi-select, whatever, you can click into here just like you would a spreadsheet and fill out the information,
Yeah.
right? And that's often one of the easiest ways to say, hey, which spreadsheets are you guys using right now to support your job? Can we bring that into HubSpot?
Yep.
And when you can show them how easy it is to treat it just like a spreadsheet, like it's just the barrier goes down. You start to remove the reasons for why they wouldn't want to, come into HubSpot and do this.
Exactly. Because ultimately, all it boils down to is it's a front end experience of the same stuff. Whether or not you're using this or a spreadsheet or another CRM or honestly even a SQL server, it's all tables of data. It's just how you interact with it. And the easier, more straightforward, and universally accessible it can be, the better experience you're going to have across your team.
Yes,
That's
accessibility. How easy
ultimately
it
what it boils
is
down to. And
to communicate with a customer internally or externally. The
mhm,
farther you get away from a system like HubSpot, the harder it's going to be, especially when we get to like network attached storage
mhm.
and VPN networks, right?
Yeah. And honestly, like the other examples like that I was gonna go through, things like file management, or even when you're building out your form or managing like job application pipeline. Honestly, like I find myself just like speeding through all of them because it's the same kind of thing. once you have a that simplified structure that's put into place, like you can see right here, everything is organized in a very similar way, and so you can toggle between all these, and like like right here, these two is the perfect example. Here's the difference between a ticket, like the ticket pipeline that we were just talking about, and this was an example one that I was doing for a job application. You
Yeah.
can It looks exactly the same, and you can manage and restructure this however you want. And yes, I'm aware I have this as like a contact view. It's more appropriate probably doing a vertical ticket view, like we would here. But you don't have to. That's the beauty of it, and that's why I did it like this. It's that, to our point that we were talking about earlier, it all boils down to a front end representation of the data. So this contact, like this job application that I put in quotes, this could be the same thing as this, which could be the same thing as this file type. It's just how it's presented to you and how you have that organized.
Yeah.
And simplifying that as much as you can for yourself and for your team is ultimately going to be what makes your life easier. And there's a huge amount of, again, I'm boiled back to the importance of what we were talking about at the beginning part of this call. Well, not call, but conversation. And that's just making sure that you're building this out for what makes the most sense for your company.
Yeah.
Map first, do second. Because if you do first and map second, you're going to find yourself using three tools that all do the same thing, and you just have to clean this up down the road. And it's
Yeah.
avoid that at all costs, because that's there's so much sanity to be saved there.
Yeah, because often, like I've seen so many times, like you'll start mapping the way that the tools have taught you how to do it,
Right.
right? And I've half the time I'm just helping people like, no, you're right. That's common sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you should do it. Like because they're so used to seeing it in these tools, and that ends up being best practice articles, and it goes deep. And I think in the follow up article, we'll share some resources related
Mm-hmm.
to, like, if you haven't clicked on the data model overview, this is why we talk about data models, and you think
Mm-hmm.
about those projects or those job applicants are all like data containers in the system, and how do they need to work together. That's why we model and map, uh, and some of us have way too much fun with that. But that's why it exists. And if you've never clicked in that area of HubSpot, there's a great like starter walkthrough of what an
Mm-hmm.
object is, what a property is. So there's some good, easy to check out resources at like 10 to 15 minutes long. And these are the building blocks that we're talking about. So uh, this is fun stuff, man. I love
Right.
talking about these kind of foundational pieces of HubSpot when you get this stuff right, um, even in the beginning, but as you're ongoing, as new opportunities come up. This is not a system that is like build it once and then
Mm-hmm.
look at it again in 5 years,
No.
right?
Every day. Every day as you every day as you're using it. And that's not a make changes every day, but it's a keep a finger on the pulse of it. And once you get to that point of realizing I hit this threshold and I need to change or grow out of it, that's where you have this conversation about, okay, where and how do we do that and implement accordingly.
Yes. Just the conversation is all we're
Mm-hmm.
asking for. We're not saying go do it, right? Just the
Exactly.
conversation, understand what you can and can't do. There's so many resources available, like, the Sprocketeer community, like
Oh yeah.
LinkedIn, like the community, at HubSpot, to just understand, has anybody ever done this before in HubSpot? Um, we're running out of situations where the answer is no,
Nope.
especially as it relates to customers. So that's what we're here for, and we'll be
These
talking about.
examples, these examples, for example, just shows like I'll throw together a quick video talking about these a little bit more in depth here today. We'll share that. Like your point, we're going to share more resources with the post. Perfect example, Sean. I will literally do a how to for each one of these different steps, and we'll share that out
Yeah,
later so you can take that with you. That's
yeah,
the whole
and I
point of
think
all
these will
this.
be good examples to map against, and understand where we could go with a system like
Absolutely.
this. So But we're also open if you have other situations or use cases that you've heard of or you want to see mapped out based on the HubSpot structure, maybe how it can better support your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Send them our way. We're happy to
Please do.
do it live and even bring some people on every now and then to kind of map it out.
Oh yeah.
So while you're thinking about that, challenge you to think about use cases you might be challenged with inside your organization. Uh, Look inside of your HubSpot, find the opportunity, and let's grow. Have a
Let's
great
do
week,
it.
everybody.
Take care.